Do you remember the clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoing through Bailey Hollow? The laughter of children playing by the creek? The stories whispered on porch swings as the sun dipped below the hills? These are the echoes of our past, the tales that built Dalton, the memories that shaped Bailey Hollow. For generations, these stories have been passed down like cherished heirlooms, but now, for the very first time, they've been captured, bound within the recordings of our new podcast, Stories of the Hollow. Join us as we unveil the history of our beloved town, a journey through time, a celebration of our heritage. Hear the stories as they were meant to be told. Discover the lives that paved our streets, the dreams that built our community. In Stories from the Hollow by the Dalton Historical Society.
I'm glad of this opportunity to finally see the edges of things. When I was a young boy in Dalton, there was a guy named Reverend Bill Lewis from the Baptist Church in Waverly that would come and talk to my grandmother, Minnie Gamar, and they'd talk about the history and what people remembered and how life was. And as a kid, I wished I had paid more attention and remembered more. But now, finally, there's a Dalton Historical Society formed, and I was thrilled to find out maybe a month ago that this existed. And now I can come to the meetings and find someone to discuss the things that I've always enjoyed talking about. Bill's written a wonderful book that I think everybody should read, and I think it's a time to learn stuff and also be able to contribute things.
And you had mentioned to me earlier that I think you knew Reverend William L. Franklin, or you knew of him. I think he authored a lot of the early history of the town.
Bill Lewis.
I'm sorry. Yes, Bill Lewis.
Yes, Reverend Bill Lewis. He was a great guy, and he was interested in Dalton history, and he made notes, which Mary Lee has kept wonderfully. When I came back came to my first meeting last month, it was really neat to see that all this stuff had been exactly as I remembered it. All the people that talked, all the stories, all the buildings, all of the churches, and all the businesses in Dalton, and that's why I'm so glad that you finally documented it in the book so people can read about it and pass it on to their kids.
And Mary Lee Shurg actually has documents, Jeff, that were prepared by the Reverend Lewis. Original primary research material.
Yes, I know. And it also validates stories. I'm a great talker and always telling stories. And then as you get older, you think, wow, did I remember that right? And now that I've been able to see the stuff she's kept from her work at the cemetery and Reverend Bill Lewis, I think, whoa, at 78, I did remember that fairly accurately.
He was a precursor to Norm Brower, yes, who is known as the historian of Dalton. Did you know Norm as well?
I did. His nickname was Scalper. I never knew why, but he was Scalper Brower, and he was the tax collector in Dalton. And he took an interest in all things local and kept a lot of documents. And while his research might not have been scientific, it's so wonderful that he pulled out of the seas of time all the stuff that he did. And I'm glad now that, again, Mary Lee, the historian, has all this stuff for public use. She has worked with the Shoemaker Cemetery in Dalton for a long time. And obviously there's a lot of history there. And when I read one of those things, it sparks a memory. She asked me one time at the farmer's market if I knew any of the Stalls. And O.P. Stall was a good friend of my grandparents. And he was an engineer that helped build the Nicholson Bridge. But he was also a businessman in Dalton that owned and redid several of the stores in Dalton. So I think it's nice. And I very much compliment you on the accuracy of your book, because I found everything to be as I would remember it.
Thank you.
It sparks memories of side stories, but everything is wonderful.
Thank you. I think Mary Lee Shurg deserves a lot of the credit for that fact, yes, because most of the research material came from her.
Yes, it did. And I think that it's great. And I'm glad now that we're going to have a public event coming up at the Dalton Library next month to give people a chance to come and see what wonderful work you've done. You people have been operating kind of in secret for the last couple of years. And I think it's wonderful now that people are going to be able to come and ask questions and get information. And, your book is such a great primary source.
You mentioned a fellow by the name of Stoll, Stoll. Is that correct?
Stull, is that right?
No, O-L.
Stoll. O.P. Stoll, Oscar Stoll.
Go ahead.
No, he was a local businessman. I believe that he was one time owner of the building where the Dalton Pharmacy currently is. But as I said, his son was Harold Stoll, who was one of my grandmother's good friends. Part of the sitting on the Thompson Street porch with Reverend Bill Lewis talks. But they lived in the Stoll house was still there when I was young in the 1950s, right across the street. It's a little park now. It's a little side
Platt Park.
Yeah.
Platt Park.
And that was the Stoll house was still there at that time. But he would tell stories about the building of the Nicholson Bridge, and everybody, there's stories and rumors and hints and innuendos that people and mules died in the Nicholson Bridge, but who knows where the truth lies in that.
Also situated over there in Platt Park was the original Abel Gardner General Store.
Yes. I don't, of course, remember that.
No, of course not.
In Dalton, everything seems to be about when the leach block burned.
Right.
And it's hard now when someone comes and asks about the history of Dalton, and we say, well, this was the leach block, and there's a nice green field there now. And I don't remember that, but that seems to be like AD, in terms of how we cite history in Dalton.
That's interesting because you had the double block, the leach block, on Main Street, just before you start up the hill to go to Waverly. But on the other end of town, the west end of town, you had another double block store. It was the Purdy block.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, there were a lot of buildings, again, that's not there. Next to the current Bailey's, which was a grocery store owned by a number of people over the years. One of them was my Uncle Don Westcott for a while. But next to that was a store that was Fred and Nora Herbs. And that was a general, kind of a candy store and a soda fountain and a coffee store. And they were just wonderful Dalton characters that building burnt in the 60s. I think that burnt.
Right.
Yep. It was a place where students would wait for the bus to go to school from Dalton. I think that it's nice now because we have a source to use as a reference for all these things. Everybody has memories, and you're never quite sure if how you remembered it was correct. And that's one of the things that's coming out of this is reading these primary sources and having a reassurance that what I remembered was right.
Right.
I'm interested in the Dalton Library because my grandmother was one of the groups that helped found the Dalton Library. And it was a group of women after World War II that liked books. And they just rented a little space in town where it was the old train station. And everyone donated books, and the women volunteered and started a library. And it took off. So there was no major government funding or anything else. It was all just these people that did it. And it grew and grew and to
What was your grandmother's name?
Minnie Gamar, and she went to the old Dalton High School, as did my mother, and as did I. So 3 generations of us went to the old school, which is no longer there. So
And where was that school?
Well, that was up off Lily Lake Road.
Right.
That school. The high school was downtown at the end of Mill Street. Yeah, and all documented in your book and all wonderfully accurate.
Was that situated down by the creek, the school?
No, it was right dead at the end of Mill Street. There was a circular driveway in front of it.
Okay.
That was the ball field down below where we played Little League baseball and, just pick up sandlot baseball. And I love whenever people, because my wife Marianne always says that I have a story for everything. So when someone's with us and we drive along Weatherby Street, I say, look at the edge of the driveway. And there's metal going down it. And those were rails from the Scranton Transit Company because Harry Dart owned it. And that's there's interesting things like that. A lot of the people just had an interest in the community. There was this piece in the Scranton paper a year or two ago about the Comerfords who owned movie theaters in Scranton.
Right.
And the Comerfords lived on Weatherby Street. And everybody was friends. On a summer night, they played a game called quoits, which is like horseshoes, but they're round circles of metal. And so on a summer's night, someone would go out and clank the quoits together, and everybody kind of come out and play this game like horseshoes and talk about stuff.
Right along the residential streets?
Yeah,
or?
It was right on Thompson Street, right below where I lived. But the nice thing was that nobody cared if someone had more money or less money or what anybody's job was. Everybody was friends, and everybody, my wife always kids me that this was a golden time in Dalton, and so it was in my mind at least. Dalton has always had that friendliness, that ability for people of all income levels or social classes or whatever to get along and share things.
Have you lived your entire life in Dalton?
No, I'm in and out. So when I was a teacher in Montrose for 35 years. We lived in Susquehanna County and Montrose for that time. So I was born here until my 20s, and then we lived there. And then I retired 19 years ago and we moved back here. So now when I talk to people, they'll say, well, I say, where do you live? And they'll say, well, I live in the Smith House. And I'll say, well, I don't know that. And then they'll tell me where it is. And I say, well, I would like to know who lived there in 1949 or 1951. And so I have this big gap in the middle, but and I knew a lot of the families that were here. The deans were apparently a big part of your book, and also of this information on it. I knew the deans, and they had a lumber business. And then we lived in Montrose. One of the dean families had moved to Montrose and ran a business manufacturing cabinets in Montrose.
Right.
It's been interesting, and I'm so excited to be able to now share information and get information from people. And I think it's wonderful that we have an upcoming event in April at the Dalton Library.
Excellent. I got to ask you this. You were out of Dalton for quite a while.
35 years.
35 years.
Well, my dad lived here, so I was not out of it.
But you came back to be a resident again.
Oh, yeah. We've always owned it.
How did it feel coming back to live here again?
Well, my wife would say when I moved back here, she didn't have an identity. She was Buzz's wife, which was my childhood nickname. So it was nice. And there's a lot of families that still have people around here, but we have made friends with the newer people that have moved into Dalton. And I think people come to seek a neighborhood. When people move into where we live, they say, it's so nice here because everybody talks. We go for a walk in the morning, pretty much every morning for a mile, and we can't get our mile in straight because people always want to stop and talk. And what do you think about this? And, people aren't stopping at that stop sign. So, we have to, everybody's concerned about everybody else. And it's a nice feeling. So I'm glad to be back in Dalton again.
Do you think that's the magic of Dalton? The fact that people talk to each other, still show an interest in each other?
I'd like to think so, because I know that whenever a house comes up for sale, and particularly in our neighborhood, it's quickly gone. And the people that are there always say that they like that community. Yeah.
When Dalton was a bustling town, particularly when you consider its location, rural, but bustling, with the Leach Block, the Purdy Block, and of course businesses in between the two.
Yeah. Very
busy. Now that's not quite the story, although it's beginning slowly to come back to a more commercial aspect. But what was better, that commercial busyness or what Dalton has now?
Well, I just think life changes. There weren't supermarkets, so there had to be a local grocery store. People didn't travel as much as we do. So people tended to live their life locally. And it wasn't just Dalton, it was every place. And if you look at how the communities are, most of the small towns in northeastern Pennsylvania are 5 miles apart, which is an easy walk for anybody either way. The larger towns are 20 to 25 miles apart, which would be a market town, so people could come to market or have their local thing. And I do remember when Dalton still had a lot of businesses, but I think that's just a cultural change now, the way lots of places have changed. Maybe for the good and maybe for not so good. People buy on Amazon instead of going to the local haberdashery or whatever. So, but I think it's a good thing. Dalton has remained a positive force.
Excellent.